the most recent of Warhammer 40k lore, the Emperor of Mankind has transitioned from a symbolic constant into an active narrative pressure that shapes events without ever resolving them. He no longer exists merely as the justification for institutions or the distant source of imperial legitimacy. Instead, he intrudes into the story at moments of metaphysical stress, and when he does, the effect is destabilizing rather than reassuring. What makes this modern portrayal compelling is that it is spread across multiple novels and series, each offering a fragmentary view that mirrors the Emperor's own fractured state. No single book explains him. Instead, the reader is forced to assemble an understanding from contradictions, silences, and moments of overwhelming force. The pivotal moment that defines this era that remains the Emperor's audience with Robute Guilliman, depicted in Dark Imperium. Guilliman's resurrection is often discussed in terms of political consequence, but its emotional and metaphysical impact are just as important. Guilliman expects answers, clarity, and perhaps even reconciliation. What he receives is something closer to psychic compression. The Emperor does not speak in sentences. He transmits urgency, disappointment, expectation, and necessity all at once. Guilliman perceives himself not primarily as a son, but as a resource. I think this is one of the most quietly brutal scenes in the modern lore, because it strips away any lingering illusion of warmth. The Emperor is not cruel in this moment, he is simply incapable of prioritizing anything other than survival. That encounter reshapes Guilliman's role through Dark Imperium, in Plague War and especially Godblight. Guilliman increasingly understands himself as an extension of the Emperor's will rather than an independent actor. Yet that will is opaque. The Emperor does not guide Guilliman step by step. Instead, Guilliman operates under a sense of pressure, an unspoken demand to impose order at any cost. This creates a persistent tension within Guilliman's rationalism and the Imperium's theocratic reality. He fights to preserve humanity while knowing that every victory reinforces institutions built on dogma and fear. The climax of this arc in Godblight represents one of the most significant developments in the Emperor's modern portrayal. During Guilliman's confrontation with Mortarion, the conflict escalates beyond the material realm. When the Emperor intervenes, acting through Guilliman as a psychic conduit, the effect is catastrophic. A portion of Nurgle's garden is burned away within the warp itself. This is not metaphorical, it is a literal injury inflicted upon a Chaos God's domain. What matters is not just that this happens, but how it is framed. The Emperor's presence is described as vast, impersonal, and annihilating. Nurgle recalls it not out of fear, but because the Emperor represents something fundamentally incompatible with the warp's nature. This is the Emperor as the anathema in its purest form. I remember reading that scene and feeling distinctly uneasy, not necessarily triumphant. There is no sense that the Emperor has won anything. Instead, it feels like a breach of containment, a moment where something held in check lashed out. Guilliman barely survives the experience, and it becomes clear that the Emperor cannot act this way freely. He requires a vessel, and that vessel suffers greatly. This reinforces a recurring theme throughout the lore. The Emperor's power is immense, but it is no longer precise. When he intervenes, he does so with overwhelming force, because subtlety may no longer be possible. Beyond Guilliman's story, the Emperor's presence permeates the political and institutional narratives of Terra itself, most notably in the Watchers of the Throne and the Vaults of Terror. These books are invaluable because they show the Emperor not as a god, but as a failing system around which power struggles and fear are accumulating. The Golden Throne is described as increasingly unstable, its demands escalating, its mechanisms understood only through ritual and tradition. Psychic fluctuations ripple through the Imperial Palace, and even the Custodes, once portrayed as flawless extensions of the Emperor's will, express uncertainty. The Custodes' perspective is particularly telling. They feel the Emperor's presence constantly, but that presence no longer translates its clear intent. Commands are inferred, debated, and sometimes contradicted. This is a subtle but profound shift. If the Custodes cannot reliably interpret the Emperor's will, then the idea of a coherent, divinely guided Imperium begins to unravel. Authority persists, but its foundation is interpretation rather than uncertainty. Guilliman's return does not resolve this tension. If anything, it exacerbates it by introducing a living figure who can challenge institutional inertia while still claiming legitimacy. The High Lords of Terror, meanwhile, rule in the Emperor's name without any direct oversight. The Emperor does not intervene to correct corruption or incompetence. He does not settle disputes. He does not clarify succession or reform. His silence forces the Imperium to rely on precedent, fear, and power politics. And I think this is intentional. The Emperor's absence from governance is not framed as a mystery to be solved, but as a condition to be endured. The Imperium survives not because it is well led, but because it's just difficult to kill. The Emperor's influence also hangs heavily over the Dawn of Fire, which chronicles the Indomitus Crusade. Although he does not appear directly, the entire crusade is predicated on his continued existence. The Astronomicon still burns. Warp travel is still possible, albeit very dangerous. Guilliman believes the Imperium can still be saved precisely because the Emperor endures. Faith in the Emperor intensifies across these novels, functioning both as glue and accelerant. It holds worlds together in isolation, but it also feeds the warp, reshaping the Emperor's presence within it. I find that duality one of the most fascinating and deeply uncomfortable parts of the Imperium in general. The Imperium depends on belief, even if that belief pushes the Emperor further from the man that he once was. The Siege of Terror series, culminating in the end and the death, retroactively enriches all of this by clarifying what the Emperor refused to become. The concept of the Dark King reframes the Emperor's final choices during the heresy as an act of restraint rather than failure. He could have embraced godhood, ending the war decisively, but at the cost of becoming a warp entity defined by domination and annihilation. His rejection of that path condemns him to the Golden Throne. That context casts a long shadow over the current setting. The Emperor's present state is not an accident or a temporary setback. It is the consequence of choosing suffering over apotheosis. What makes this especially relevant, in my opinion, now, is that many of the pressures that threaten to create the Dark King still exist, magnified by 10,000 years of worship and sacrifice. Every miracle risks becoming a step toward the thing he once refused. Every act of divine intervention tightens the paradox. The Emperor must act to preserve humanity, but acting too much risks transforming him into something that could destroy it. I think this tension is one of the most effective pieces of modern storytelling in this setting, because it turns hope into a liability. Very grimdark. Across all of these recent books, a consistent image emerges. The Emperor is active but constrained, powerful but fragmented, essential but increasingly alien. He does not guide humanity towards enlightenment. He maintains a minimum threshold of survival. His role has shifted from architect to load-bearing structure. He holds the galaxy together, not because it's just, functional, or worth saving, but because letting it collapse would mean annihilation on a scale even he cannot accept. I'll admit spending time with these newer portrayals has changed how I think about the Emperor. He no longer feels like a distant god waiting to return. He feels like a system under impossible strain, forced to operate continuously without maintenance or relief. The books don't ask us to admire him or condemn him. They present him as a reality the Imperium cannot escape. The Emperor appears more often now than at any point since the heresy, yet paradoxically, he has never felt less present as a person. He is a power without comfort, authority without guidance, and endurance without hope. And the setting seems content to let that unresolved tension persist, pressing outward into every corner of the galaxy. If you'd like to support the channel, please like and hype the video in the comment section below, subscribe, and check back for daily videos. This archive has now been fully decoded. Continue your journey with the video displayed on screen. The vast wealth of the archives continues to reveal new knowledge of the dark history of the 40k verse. From the grim dark of the far future, there is only